Well, hello there, young academics. I will be making this video to try and help you out with chapter 23. I'm going to go sort of quickly and just go through this PowerPoint. I think it might be nice to have the words on the screen, so trying something different. So hopefully you like it. So the end of the Civil War. How's Lincoln going to deal with the South? Here is this delightful quote. He says, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace." Basically, Lincoln is saying he wants to repair the country. He wants to bring the North and the South back together. And he is going to be pretty lenient on the South. He's going to be pretty forgiving to the South. And that is what Andrew Johnson does as well. After Lincoln is assassinated, Andrew Johnson becomes president. Like Lincoln, Andrew Johnson is going to be lenient on the South. The problem is that Andrew Johnson isn't Abe Lincoln. It's like Mr. Canton trying to be me. It just won't work. He ain't that cool. So Andrew Johnson has a harder time being lenient on the South, and because he's from Tennessee, people are less likely to trust him. Here is what Andrew Johnson's plan is. So this is Johnson's Reconstruction plan. It's pretty soft or lenient on the South. He says the states need to write new state constitutions. They need to say that they repeal their secession. They need to elect new state governments. He's going to cancel the Confederate war debt. So the war debt the South has, he's going to cancel that out. And also the states have to pass the 13th Amendment, which ends slavery. Many former Confederates come back into the government after this. So a lot of the same people who broke away, who seceded, and former slave owners are now going to be back in the Confederate government. And you can imagine that that's not the best thing for African Americans in the South. One positive is that the Freedmen's Bureau gets formed. The Freedmen's Bureau is an organization to help free slaves overcome the challenges that freed slaves now have. So they give things like they provide food, medical care, job training. Very seldomly, occasionally, some slaves got some land, and the phrase was always 40 acres and a mule. You always hear that during Reconstruction, but not that many African Americans actually got that. But the biggest part of the Freedmen's Bureau, the most lasting, is that it sets up schools for African Americans in the South. So it helps African Americans with education, and that's its most lasting effect. Black codes come, like I said, with those new Confederate leaders, or with the same Confederate leaders being in the government. Very quickly, they introduced some pretty racist laws. They would not allow African Americans to vote. And a real terrible one is that they would pass these laws called vagrancy laws. So if they caught any black person really not working, so if they're moving somewhere or if they're if they're walking to a friend's house or family, say, "You're not working, you're a vagrant," which means kind of like homeless, you move about. Now we're going to arrest you and we're going to put you to work. We're going to make you a prisoner and hire you out to work on a chain gang. So it's not slavery, but in some ways it's a lot like slavery. So there's a number of terrible laws called black codes that emerge in the South after Johnson's Reconstruction plan. After Johnson's plan, Congress, so in 1865, by the end of 1865, President Johnson feels like Reconstruction's done, the South is back together with the North, let's move on with it. But Congress says that's not the case, Mr. Johnson. So in Congress, there are a group of Republicans called radical Republicans, and radical doesn't mean awesome or tubular. Radical means extreme. And they think the federal government has a much bigger role to play in making sure that black Americans in the South have some rights. So they start to pass some laws. In 1866, they extend the Freedmen's Bureau. So they think that organization needs to be around longer to help make African Americans have the transition from slavery to being an average citizen. And they also passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which is trying to eliminate the black codes. President Johnson vetoes both of these bills, and after that point, Congress and Johnson don't really get along. Radical Republicans think he's terrible. They think he's too soft on the South. They think he's from the South, and he's just helping out his own buddies. So what happens is Congress overrides both of Johnson's vetoes. Presidents typically don't have their vetoes overridden, so it's a pretty big deal. It happens all the time to Johnson, and Congress and President Johnson really just kind of hit each other back and forth like, naughty little brothers and sisters. In 1866, the 14th Amendment passed. Even though President Johnson is against it, he tries to persuade people not to go for it. It gets passed anyhow, and it's called the Equal Rights Amendment. A Military Reconstruction Act in 1867. So this is a big change from Johnson's plan that was passed in 1865. What it basically does, it gets rid of Johnson's Reconstruction plan. Johnson vetoes this, of course, and Congress, again, overrides him. So what happens is the South is divided into 5 military districts. Each district is led by a military general. And the new state governments are to be formed. But this time, Confederate leaders cannot be in the government, and they can also not vote. So now, before, African Americans weren't really voting. Now you have Confederates not able to vote, and you're going to have African Americans voting. So it's a huge change from the South. It's about a 180 from where they had been a short time before. Congress also, to kind of get back at Johnson, they passed 2 acts to limit his power. One is the Command of Office Act, which deals with the military, and the other one is the Tenure of Office Act. And basically what the Tenure of Office Act says is that President Johnson needs approval from Congress before he can hire and fire some people in the government. Well, Johnson thinks it's unconstitutional, and he says, all right, Congress, I'm going to fire this person just to make a point. And then Congress says, okay, you're going to break our laws. We are going to impeach you. And that's exactly what they do. He isn't actually kicked out of office. Impeached means they start the trial to remove you. So the trial started. Johnson is 1 vote away from being kicked out of office. So he stays in, but he's pretty much put into a corner. Most of his power to do anything is done at that point. Sharecropping we talked about in class. This is an economic system that emerges in the South. What happens is a lot of African Americans are looking for work now that they had to feed their families and find homes and make money. And what happens is a lot of times they start settling on land, sometimes of their former plantation owner, but they don't have any money in which to pay rent for that piece of land. So what they do is they give about a half to a third of their crop to pay for their rent. Well, the system develops where they need to, in order to get started farming, you need tools, you need shovels, you need seed, sometimes you need a mule or a horse. Well, to get money or the tools, they have to borrow that a lot of times from the plantation owners who charge them extremely high interest rates. They will mess with the records to show that African Americans actually owe them more than they do. The whole point of this system is for white landowners to have their land being worked, to be profiting off of it, and to tie African Americans to that land so that they're in debt and they're pretty much stuck there and stuck in a lower place in society with little hope for improvement. That's really the point of sharecropping, and a lot of African Americans are in that system shortly after the Civil War. Southern Reconstruction. So here is where things really are best for freed slaves and African Americans in the South. So because of the Military Reconstruction Act, the U.S. Army is back in the South, and it starts to help register black voters. So here are the groups in the South that can vote. Women cannot. You should all know that 1920 is when women get the right to vote. But freedmen, so former slaves, can vote in the South. White Southerners who oppose the war, or Northerners who had moved to the South. But the people that cannot vote are former Confederates. They are not allowed to vote. So again, this is a huge change, makes a big difference. A few unpopular groups in the South are scalawags, which is a Southerner who voted for Republicans. Most Southern Democrats see these people as traitors and terrible, and they say all sorts of nasty things about them and their mothers. And a carpetbagger is a Northerner who moves to the South to get rich off the South's battered condition. Plenty of Northerners move down. There's lots of money to be made in the South, rebuilding buildings, towns, railroads, etc. But the Southerners do not have a very positive viewpoint of those Northerners. In 1868, Ulysses S. Grant, former Union general, is elected. He gets elected with the help of about 500,000 black voters in the South, and the Republicans realize how important that is to them being elected, especially in the South. In 1869, the 15th Amendment is passed, and basically all men can vote regardless of race is what the 15th Amendment is. Again, sorry ladies, no luck. You have to wait another 70 years. The new state governments and constitutions. So a lot of the governments of the South now work on rebuilding the South. They pass laws for free public education schools. Many times it's still mostly for whites. On a positive note, a fourth of all the lawmakers are African Americans, and taxes go up about 400% to pay for all the rebuilding. So there are some Southern white men, especially, going crazy because now they can't vote. They're African American politicians, which they think is crazy, and their taxes are going up insanely. So there's a lot of angry white dudes in the South at this time period. Also, with the federal government, there are 20 black congressmen and 2 black senators during this time period. So Reconstruction starts to come to an end in the 1870s. So part of what happens is Southern Democrats are trying to change things with politics, but they're unable to. So what they do is they start to get violent. This is where the Ku Klux Klan comes into play. And what they'll do is they intimidate people. They'll put a burning cross in their yard at night. They will beat them. They will threaten them and sometimes even kill people if they are voting or working for African American rights in the South. And the hard part is that a lot of times a mayor or police officers or sheriffs in town would be part of the Klan, so it was very hard for African Americans to avoid that. To help prevent this, the Congress and President Grant passed the Enforcement Acts in 1870 and 71, and they send U.S. troops down to protect African Americans trying to vote. It helps out for a little while again, but the North pretty much abandons the South in a short amount of time after that. So in 1872, this is part of where the North starts kind of letting the South go, is the Amnesty Act. What it does, it gives Confederates forgiveness. Now former Confederates can vote again, and they can join, they can become politicians and be lawmakers again, which really is the beginning of end of Reconstruction in the South. So what leads to the official end of Reconstruction is the election of 1876. Rutherford B. Hayes is the Republican candidate versus Tilden, who's a Democrat. What happens is there's a bunch of fraud in 3 different states, and they can't figure out who should actually win the last 20 electoral votes. What happens is Congress makes a deal. The Republicans in the North say, we will let Hayes become president. If you let Hayes become president, we will leave the South. We will take out the military. We will let the Southern politicians make your rules again. And basically what they're doing is they're abandoning African Americans in the South, letting the South have their old ways. So after 1877, after that compromise, Southern Democrats quickly reversed a lot of the laws and the gains that African Americans had made during Reconstruction. Education stops getting funded, so now people are going to have to pay to go to schools. Blacks lose voting rights in a few different ways. One way is the poll tax, where you have to pay a tax to vote. Another way is through literacy tests. A lot of times, these tests were based on the state constitution, and they were extremely hard. The whole purpose of these tests was to make you fail. However, white Southerners got a pass on these. They didn't have to take them because of the grandfather clause. What the grandfather clause said is that if your grandfather was allowed to vote before January 1st, 1867, then you didn't have to take a literacy test or a poll tax. Well, it's a racist law because no African Americans were allowed to vote before then, so the whole purpose is to make blacks take these tests that they were never meant to pass to keep black people from voting. Drawing a color line, it talks about this in your book. Jim Crow laws start popping up in the South. Jim Crow laws are all about segregation, so separating by race in movie theaters, buses, schools, drinking fountains, etc. Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896 is a Supreme Court case that rules separate but equal is okay. So the Supreme Court gives the South the go-ahead to continue these Jim Crow laws, and it doesn't change until 1954. So the South has these laws that separate by race until the Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. We also read an article and talked about in class that lynchings were really common during this time period, that in early 20th century and late 19th century that there was a lynching almost every day or every other day in the South. And then how African Americans respond to segregation. A small group moves to Liberia in Africa, which was made by people who had left America. Many black Americans move north, but it's hard because they have to learn new jobs, they have to work in factories and compete with immigrants. And some head west, like Buffalo Soldiers and Exodusters, who move to Kansas for more opportunity. Most commonly, though, they stay in their own communities and try to build up from there. I'm running out of time, so best of luck to you.